Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friends of the Force, a Star Wars podcast. I'm your host, Brad.
And I'm your host, Sarah.
And this is our series, Andor Candor, where we talk all things Andor. And we have such a special episode today that we're so thrilled to share with everybody because we got to talk to Andor composer Nicholas Britell as part of a press roundtable. We were just so thrilled because we're just foaming at the mouth over this score recently. We've been jamming to it the last couple days.
This is my Super Bowl. This is my Super Bowl, guys. I feel beyond honored and very lucky for us to have been invited to this roundtable. And guys, he's so great. You're really going to enjoy this interview. We had the opportunity to be there alongside fellow podcasting and Star Wars loving friends, Blast Points, Jedi News, Skytalkers, Space.com, Talking Bay 94, and Triad of the Force. So you will hear all their voices throughout this as well with their excellent questions. And oh my gosh. Yeah, this was my Super Bowl. And when he mentions the time grappler, just imagine my face completely lighting up near tears. I can't explain it. I can't explain it.
Yeah, you can tell that his passion for this project radiates through, and it was really great questions were asked by every outlet. So I think this is such a fun interview. So buckle yourselves up. If you haven't already listened to the soundtrack, it is out now anywhere that you get music, Spotify, Apple Music, you name it. Volume 2 does drop on November 4th and Volume 3 drops on December 2nd. So there's 2 more to go. A lot of Star Wars music now out in the world. So very exciting stuff. Nicholas Britell has also composed some amazing scores for If Beale Street Could Talk, The King, Vice, and The Big Short, as well as Moonlight, which is a Best Picture winner. So
and Succession.
And Succession. Speaking of other TV shows. Succession. Yeah. Still got to watch that. But again, we were just so honored to have been a part of this. And without further ado, let's turn it over to our interview with composer Nicholas Britell.
So our question is, we are loving how each title sequence has a slightly different piece of music, almost like a musical version of the opening crawl in the films. Where did that idea come from, and what was the process for composing a different musical introduction for each episode?
That is a great question. It was interesting. It wasn't something that we knew we were going to do in the very beginning. I worked with Tony for basically 2 years on all the music for Andor for season 1. So it was something that I think about a year and a half ago, when I was presenting him some of the early possibilities for a theme for Cassian, but also really for Andor, for the whole sort of show itself. When I was showing him all the, this one piece, I was showing him all the stems and all the different elements of it. And I was like, I like the big version, but I was like, when you just hear the cellos, it's really beautiful. And also, if you just hear like the synthesizers, it's kind of cool. And so we kind of looked at each other. We're like, maybe we do a few of these. And then it actually very quickly became something where we realized that there was a concept there of evolving it over the course of the whole season so that we could tailor each main title to what was about to happen and sometimes sort of relate to both what has just happened and where we're about to go in the next episode. So it became this kind of like a, calibration almost for each episode. And the process of doing it was, it was a lot of work. It was every episode. We scored these in, and I can talk a lot about all this for sure, but we scored them in London, recorded with orchestra. I did all the synthesizer work. And basically every single episode that I was scoring, I would say to myself, what is the main title I'm going to do for this? And I would, Tony lives 11 blocks from me. So he was here all the time sitting on this couch, actually. And, I would say, I think this feels good. And we worked so closely together on each of these and tailored each one to sort of what we were feeling at the time.
Hi there. One of the things I love most about your work is it really feels like your music takes us into the minds of the characters as opposed to just sitting atop them. I think this is super present, especially in the Past to Present suite and in our most recent episode that we saw, episode 8, where we have these beautiful string orchestrations, but this very kind of tilted synthesizer. When you're writing music for Cassian or a particular world, what do you feel like you need to understand about the character or the situation in order to approach writing the music for it?
It's a great question. I think it gets to kind of the heart of the whole process in a way, because I think every project, no matter what it is, every show, every film deserves its own sonic landscape, its own sort of DNA. And the complicating factor on something as epic as Andor is that every episode in a way also demands its own approach. So, you were talking about the most recent episode that has its own whole sonic palette in a way. But to calibrate that to sort of get into what it is, especially for Cassian, that was something that it really evolved for me over time. I start every project at zero, like I try to be as blank a slate as possible. And through conversations with Tony, through reading I read these very top secret early scripts, and then starting to see imagery, eventually starting to see footage, and then edited episodes. I feel I'm learning along the way as that's happening. So it's not like there's sort of one thing where I sort of realize, oh, I think this is it. It's actually something about, I experiment with a lot of different ideas. And I think over time, you sort of discover that certain things resonate with the picture. Certain things when you're, especially like, I did a lot of on-camera music actually before they had shot everything. I mean, that was a whole endeavor unto itself. But, once I started like working on episode 1, because we did it in order in that way. And once I started working on episode 1, there were certain things that it felt like Cassian, like certain motifs, certain progressions. And the thing I knew was that as he evolved, as he learned about himself, as he learned about his universe and the struggle that's going on, that certainly would change. And, and it changes through episode 8, certainly changes all the way going. There's a lot more obviously to come. But I think it's sort of an abstract answer, but it's kind of about feeling. It's about feelings. It's about feeling that for Cassian in particular, I think there's this questioning that he's doing that he doesn't even know he's doing. I think sometimes, he doesn't know. He wants to know about his past. He wants to know about his present. But at the same time, I think there are certain things he may never know. And I think the music itself is trying to capture that in a sense. The main title, in a way, you can imagine a main title as being sort of a big immediate concept. I actually wrote the main title, so it starts almost at nothing. It starts like kind of just with this pulsing, this kind of lurking feeling. And as it grows over 35.2 seconds, it goes, it has this final crescendo culmination, and then it goes away as well. So there's this kind of like, it's sort of discovering itself and then it vanishes. And I think maybe there's a metaphor there with Cassian too, that he doesn't know. And then we have glimpses of learning and discovering and realizing, and then maybe something else happens.
Thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us, Nicholas.
Sure.
You just mentioned that you start each project with a blank canvas, and then you build from there. So what will you take with you from season 1 as you start to develop and you continue the themes? Obviously, we know where we're going with the characters, but obviously we don't know how they get there. Right. So what have you learned, and what will you take with you as you begin to approach the journey in season 2?
Another great question. That's a big question too, that I don't even know the answers to that. I think, the definite starting point I would have, and again, I haven't, I'm talking to Tony right now. We're already planning certain things out, but I haven't actually, begun the official scoring of season 2 yet. But my sense would be as we, like I was saying, as I score a project, you learn as you go, you discover things, which I think is fascinating too. I feel that, it's not a science. This is very much something that every episode sort of teaches you things. And, you might try a theme out in one episode and it really feels right. And then you might try the same theme out in another episode and it doesn't work at all. The film just rejects it, So I have certain themes that I think feel like they're related to the dynamics of the struggle of characters. There are many themes, certainly. There's themes, just big picture. I mean, some of them, there's obviously a sort of Andor scope theme. There's motifs related to Cassian. There's motifs certainly around Mon Mothma and the rebellion. There's every episode has certain unique signatures too that are almost like latent within those episodes. And I'm imagining that there will be a lot of individuation as we go too. So there's probably many things that I haven't yet thought of that we will come to. But I think many of the large scale themes are certainly things that I imagine carrying over. Luthen's theme, which obviously intersects with many things. The ISB theme that I wrote. So those are some of the things that I would imagine. But again, I actually have not read any scripts, so I can't say for sure just about anything.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Nicholas. My name is Caitlin from Skytalkers. So nice to talk to you today.
Sure.
You mentioned this previously a question ago, but I wanted to learn some more about the music that was played on set during filming. This seemed so cool and special that you got to do this. Without spoiling anything, can you discuss how that decision came about?
Sure. You've seen some of it so far. There's definitely more to come. But it was just for purely almost practical considerations. That was the stuff that Tony and I began with first because it had to be done, and it was really important to both of us that it be really done on set. So I did a lot of demoing and pre-records, but people actually recorded stuff on set. Some of those things, for example, if I'm thinking like episode 3, the alarm signaling on Ferrix, that was a whole kind of percussion suite that I wrote, and each rhythm had its own meaning that Tony and I would talk about. So there's a rhythm at the very top of it where that sort of signals like a message is coming. And then there's a rhythm for the commencement of the alarm. And then there's other rhythms that sort of join. So that was one example of that we worked on a lot. And, it's so complicated too, because you come up with these things and then they're done on set, and then you see how that worked. And then in post, you sort of then try to figure out, okay, well, really big questions like, does the score have to be in the same tempo as the signaling? Or if it's in the same tempo, does it work or not? And the interesting thing is that there's no right answer for these. Like, so for example, with the signaling, it was important that the score didn't acknowledge it, because when you started acknowledging it, it started feeling like the signaling was score, and it's not. You're seeing it, So that was like, okay, don't do that. But for example, the time grappler, that was another example of on camera. We had to have him, swinging that mallet, and that was something where we actually wrote this very elaborate series of individual musical idents for different times of day, for different instructions that they were giving the people of Ferrix, at different moments of the day. And so that was something where at times the score actually is in the same key as the time grappler, because sometimes it felt weird if it wasn't, so those were the types of things, both in current production, post-production, we had to figure those out. Another example is the Aldani Eye Festival, the chanting and all of that music. I wrote that music. Tony wrote those wonderful lyrics, shall we say, those were all different things, each of which that was very complex too, because the score in those sequences was so large scale. And that was one where it did have to sort of connect in certain ways. So those were some examples of the process and the challenges, and there's definitely more to come. So that's what I would say about that.
My question for you is, well, congratulations on such a dignified and distinctive score. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
So my question is, what was the sort of musical recipe that you concocted for the score, and when did you know when you had nailed it?
Wow, that's a tough one. I think I don't know if you ever know if you nail something. I think you're always just putting in the time and the effort, and you're sort of you're going on your instinct that if it's working, if it's resonating for you, for me, my hope is that then it resonates for other people, and if it's working for me and Tony, then I get more confidence that it's working, So it's a lot of, it's a lot of time, and it's a lot of effort, really. And the formula, it was really from the very start, Tony and Kathy Kennedy were so supportive and so, really clear about wanting a unique soundscape for Andor, and about really, hoping that it could have kind of its own sound palette and unique new themes and textures. And so that really gave me the sense of not just support, but freedom to explore things. And I had this instinct very early on that obviously I love working with orchestras, and it's one of the greatest joys of being a composer, I think, is getting to write for orchestra. But at the same time, there was something with Andor that immediately, to me, I was drawn to these sort of older analog synthesizers that, and I don't often get to write with a sound palette like that, but there was something about, perhaps it was the idea that I grew up loving Star Wars. I mean, I think Return of the Jedi, I think, was the first, my parents, I think, was the first movie they took me to in a movie theater when I was like 3, So I love Star Wars, and the idea that this comes before that, this is this kind of earlier than that trilogy. This is before Rogue One. There was something almost like retro that I was thinking like, what would sound like we're before this, And there was something about, to me at least, there was something about this sort of retro analog synthesis that felt like we were going to the before stages of something that could then grow into, hopefully, what we all know eventually, the sort of majesty that Star Wars is, So that was maybe an early instinct I had, and certainly not everything is synthesizer. There's we recorded with a huge string orchestra and brass and percussion and amazing musicians. So there's all of that. But I think those were some early instincts that I had. And I think the actual, orchestration itself really varies episode to episode. That was my other sort of point to myself, I think, was that every episode we're in different planets, we're in different places, we're in different parts of the story. So it felt like it really each episode had to have its own unique thought process, which certainly added to the work that Tony and I gave ourselves.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, Nicholas. Brandon from Talking Bay 94.
Hey.
I would love to dive in. This is the most tense show I've ever watched, I feel like, every week. And the music is a huge part of that. And the pulses and the backing behind it is just a huge part of how this show functions. I'd love to dive in to how you've constructed that and how you play that against what's happening on screen.
Sure. There are varying degrees of tension in different episodes. And some of that is really Tony and I, us talking about what's happening and what is, what's the scope of the current endeavor. So there are certain episodes where the tension is really high, and I don't want to give anything away with where things go, but I would say there are certain things that I do perhaps, to add to the tension. One thing that I was doing a lot was there are certain orchestral concepts and certain musical ideas you can do to increase tension. One thing that I added was I felt it was really important that things had to feel like they weren't from Earth. You know what I mean? Like I really wanted it to feel like this is not our galaxy, And so there's you'll hear it in a lot of places. There's a sort of detuning that I do with things quite often in the show, both with real instruments and also with synthesizers, to give a sense of it. I mean, to me, it doesn't just feel in a faraway galaxy. To me, it also feels like something's not quite right, And when you do that, coupled with, for example, rising elements, or when you do that with lurking, pulsing low. I mean, there's a sort of stew that you concoct, and every single one of those. I mean, I would really stress, like, every single moment in the show is a unique musical piece. There's no, we didn't like, I mean, maybe this is our own masochism or something like that. But like we really, we wrote every single scene has something unique, and that's Tony is so passionate about this. I was starting to say it before, but we underestimated how much work this was going to be. And we had already thought it was going to be a lot of work. So that was for sure. But we vastly underestimated how much work this was going to be. We worked constantly on this, like constantly. And so the question about the tension, every single moment where that's happening, you can picture Tony and me right here being like, all right, well, what are we doing here? And then it being like, I don't think it's enough, and there's also certain things too. For example, I think there's often, as things are increasing in scope, for example, I think sometimes the outs of certain scenes rise even to, or crescendo or culminate, so there's a sort of like moment to moment escalation that you might feel in certain episodes. But I think there's also like inside certain of these scenes, there's a gradually increasing something's wrong feeling, probably.
Incredible. Thank you.
Hi, Nicholas. It's Gustavo with Triad of the Force. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. My question has to do with like how we create the soundscapes for Andor, and it's rooted with how we experience Star Wars. As for the past 40 years, we've grown so accustomed to what the sounds of Star Wars needs to be based on those original scores from the 9 trilogy films. And now in this, in this new post-Skywalker era with all these composers coming in, there's been a sort of reverence to what Star Wars needs to sound like. And now with Ludwig in Mandalorian, we've gotten to see some departures of what that can be, but still in a way grounded into, that Williams soundscape, so to speak. With Andor, though, it feels like we've broken the wheel and we've kind of, done something completely different, that it's not, rooted in that sense in terms of like having orchestration and synthesizers and a lot of different percussive elements that we haven't experienced before. So my question is like, how have we reinterpreted what Star Wars sounds like, and how do you decide when to use orchestration versus like synth and electronic elements for like those moments, like in the Niamos Marlana club mix, which is now the best track in the whole of the Star Wars canon, I think.
Thank you so much. Well, the answer is really moment to moment. I mean, like I was saying, it was a constant conversation. I think that in general, towards the beginning of season 1, I wasn't trying to avoid orchestra, but I think there's something dark and very real that Tony was going for. There's a sense that, it's like we're right with Cassian. We're, we're in his POV. We don't know what's happening. And yet you see before the episode, you see the Star Wars logo, and yet immediately you're sort of, where are we? And I think that early on, I was trying to almost, really embrace that feeling of maybe this is Star Wars, but maybe this is Star Wars you haven't seen before. This is a part of the galaxy we haven't been to, in a sense, feeling wise, for sure. And so, I adore the John Williams scores. I mean, like John Williams is beyond a legend to me, but I think in some ways it was a very conscious thing of saying, we're going for something different here. And when orchestra would come in, I think it felt like it was right. It felt like there are certain elements, I think, especially in the first few episodes, the first time you really have probably a large scale orchestra enter the picture is the end of episode 3, where it's the wraparound, bringing everything sort of together in the past present suite. But also, even there, you're noticing there's a lot of close mic'd individual instruments. It's sort of even mic'd. I even recorded some of the music differently. So I think I was trying to go for a very like intimate feel in some of these things. There's a dark synthesizer edge to things. There is a sort of hard percussive edge to things, but there's also, I think, like a very emotional, close mic'd solo instrument feel at times too. That's sort of some of the first few episodes, even down to hearing the leaves in Kenari, that's part of the score. Hearing all those different percussive sort of forest elements, sort of like a close feeling, I guess is what I would say. And as the scope of the series increases and as we learn more and as the drama increases, to me, that's where orchestra then should enter into the picture even more. There's nothing grander for scope than a beautiful symphony orchestra. And yet, like you were saying on Niamos, there's always room for more synthesizer, I think. So there's definitely, that's not going away. And that's certainly part of, I just feel that became a part of this, certainly season one. And to your point about mentioning the Niamos track, the thing that we thought about when I initially wrote that piece for actually the Morlana Club in episode 1. And I had this idea that I pitched to Tony, and he was totally in for it, where I was like, what if the diegetic music in some of these places is this same piece of music that's just sort of this very well-known hit in the galaxy? Like, there's just this piece that, you hear the Morlana Club version. When you're in Coruscant, you hear it's like a diplomatic kind of lounge version, and then when you're on Niamos, that's like where it is. That's the galaxy mix of Niamos, you're there, so that was kind of the idea. And it just, I remember saying to him, I was like, when we enter Niamos, I think we have to hear this track,
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to this roundtable discussion with composer Nicholas Britell. Again, as we mentioned up front, part of this was Blast Points, Jedi News, Skytalkers, Space.com, Talking Bay 94, and Triad of the Force. So make sure to go check out their episodes as well and give them a like, because this was a joint effort. And it was so much fun to be alongside such great podcasters. So truly honored. And if you'd like to hear more from us here on the show, you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, you name it. And make sure wherever you're listening to the podcast to leave us a rating if you could. Let us know what you enjoyed about the episode, help other folks find the show, and then subscribe so all of our future Andor Candor episodes drop in your podcast feed.
Also, we have a Patreon where tiers start at just $1, and we are immensely grateful for our patrons who help make this whole show happen. They are Amy, Brian with an I, Brian with a Y, Cheryl, Clay, Danny, Davis, Dylan, Huang, Jen, Knights of Ren, Leanne, Levi, Lindsay, Randy, Rob, Saber Bouquet, Skytalkers, Stephen, Travis, and Tom. Thank you all so much for your support, and thank you to everybody who took the time out of their day to listen to all the way to the very end of this episode. Hope you have a good day.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you all once again. And until next time, may the Force be with you always.
Bye.